Hi, my name's Kirsty Page, and in this video we're going to take a closer look at auditory memory, but particularly an essential skill, which is sequential auditory memory. Now, this is a really important skill, not just for phonics, but for wider learning. But in the world of phonics, it allows children to move on to blend. It underpins blending, but also that ability to hold words, to hold sounds, to hold words and sounds as children move into writing. So if you are a Launchpad user, we look at auditory memory and sequential auditory memory in a couple of ways. We look at it in this red bit where we build the skills and we can look at children's skills, but the children don't necessarily have to have language and understanding around what it is that they're listening to and remembering. They might do, but they don't have to. And then we look at it again in this first orange column, this auditory memory for understanding, which has various sequential skill steps in there, where children don't just have to listen to words and hold words. They have to demonstrate a level of understanding. And certainly this skill strand is crucial. And as an ex-speech and language therapist and in my world of work now, I know that gaps with this skill strand cause all sorts of issues for children. So very, very much needs to be a bedrock of my preparation, but also is somewhere where I go to look for gaps for older children who are finding things tricky. So if we think about the red bit, so if we think about for most people just building auditory memory as we prepare children for literacy and for phonics without that language and that need to understand, a lot of it is stuff that we're doing already, but we maybe need to do a little bit more of. So I can use musical instruments, I can use rhythms, I can use environmental sounds in the same way as I use them to build auditory discrimination, but rather than just asking the children to listen to one thing and recognize and identify the object or the picture that matches that one sound, which is obviously important and where it starts. Once children can do that, I'm going to also build that breadth and depth of skill where I ask them to listen to two sounds, and can they then identify the two things that made those sounds, and also then can they hold two sounds, but then can they remember them in the right order. So I can see that in my preparation work, it's not just how do I move my children onto listening to phonemes in words as quickly as possible. There's actually a depth and breadth to the preparation skills that I really need to facilitate if I want long-term success and better outcomes for my children. I can also do things like rhythms and clapping out words, but clapping out words by syllables and then counting the claps, which is very good for phonological awareness, very good for early maths, but also there will be that kind of auditory memory element to it. And also remembering things like stories, particularly stories that have got a mantra, a repetitive bit of language that comes out throughout the text, are really useful for auditory memory. Songs and rhymes naturally, but also in my interactions, just doing a lot more sort of talking through activities and talking about the sequences that an activity involves, and then maybe going back over and talking about what we did do afterwards and building the sequence. So that's not pure auditory memory because the children have things to look at and they're doing things at the same time, but it's just about building that depth of skill in our children. What I can do, as well as making more use of those opportunities that I've already got and maybe doing a little bit more auditory memory stuff, is I can really add into my practice a lot more auditory memory for understanding. And then in this way, I'm building my children's pre-literacy skills and getting my children ready for phonics, but I am also working on language at the same time. So if I've got a lot of children with earlier language starting points, with earlier levels of success, language delays, language disorders, children who are newer to English, then having a skill strand where I can, for want of a better phrase, kill two birds with one stone is a really important way of looking at things. We don't have to compartmentalize phonics away from language. And really what I'm doing is I'm looking at, with familiar vocabulary, and you've always got to use familiar vocabulary, children's ability over time to hold a gradually increasing number of words. And that's all plotted out for you on Launchpad. If any of these children see a speech and language therapist, they might talk about this as understanding key words or information carrying words. So that's that ability using familiar vocabulary to follow simple instructions and then slightly longer instructions and then even longer again, so that they can hold more words in their auditory memory and then act out that instruction, demonstrating the understanding. Now, as well as building word level understanding, I also want to be building that sequential skill. Not just can you hold 2 words, but now can you hold 2 words in the right order? Not can you just hold 3 words, can you hold 3 words in the right order? And that is a crucial skill for phonics, but also will underpin story retelling, writing, reading comprehension, understanding instructions in the classroom. It's really an important skill. Now, if I want to work on sequential understanding, then I can embed opportunities into my learning environment, but I can also do some focused activities around them. And if you're just getting started, one of the most valuable sets of resources, I suppose, will be what I would call line-upable resources. And I don't think that's a real word, but I've made it into a real word. So that might be my animals, my transport, any other things that have got like an intrinsic front and intrinsic back that lend themselves really well to being lined up. And again, I have to use familiar vocabulary when I'm doing this, but from a choice of 6, for example, can my children make a line of 2 on request, or could they make a line of 3? So can you do car, bus, train? So there has to be a choice. And when you're asking them to make that line, of course, you would want to demonstrate what the activity is first, but you want to be careful not to point to the objects that you're asking for. At this point, you want to be just offering the words and the words alone, because it's an auditory skill. But then if the child finds it tricky, at that point you would move in with your gestures, with your pointing, with your support, and helping them by doing it together. So again, those line-upable objects will be available in my learning environment. We just need to think about where they are, who needs work on this. Is it all of our children, or is it just certain children who are older but still need to kind of be backtracked and building this skill? But again, those are resources that I can take and use in my group work. And I always like to use resources in my groups that at other times are available in my learning environment. I don't need special equipment to work on this skill. But in my interactions, I can also, once I know which children particularly need support with this and at which level, and for some of us with younger children, this might be all of my cohort, but they're still going to be at slightly different levels, I can embed a lot more opportunities to go and fetch me, go and find me, can you bring me? But again, for some children, it would begin by, can you just find me one object, single word level understanding? But again, who can cope with me asking to go and find 2 objects or 3 objects? And can I create opportunities where they don't just go and fetch them, but they've got to get with them in the right order? And sometimes involving our stories with this are useful. So rather than using always text and stories with pictures, I can just make up my own little simple stories. I could maybe tell a story about shopping, for example, and then after, and just not lots of language, but see at the end if we've got objects that match the words in the story, and if we've got a little basket, can we remember what that person bought, and can we remember what order they bought it in? These are really just simple but easy and effective ways to build this skill. And speaking of shopping, once my children get a little bit older and can cope with little speaking and listening circle times and circle games, then the good old-fashioned things like Grandma Went to Market is useful, where the children have to generate something that Grandma bought at the market, and then the next person has to say what the person before said and then add their own vocabulary. Then the person has to say those two things and then add theirs. Great for building auditory memory, great for building turn taking and group skills, and for doing a little bit more focus on vocabulary and semantics. I might send Grandma, or whoever, it doesn't have to be a grandma, but in my world it often is. I send Grandma to a market where you can only buy things that are shiny, or you can only buy things that have got wheels, or you can only buy things that have got buttons, or you can only buy things that move or are noisy. So what I do here is I take a semantic category, a link, and then the children don't just have to remember what the people before them said. When they're trying to find and add a word themselves when it's their turn, they have to think, what word do I know that has that connection of being shiny or noisy, or from that certain topic that this market is about. So I am sure you will have lots more opportunities in your learning environment. You'll have lots more ideas, but these are just a few throw-ins from me, a few two penneths, to put things across from my point of view, and to maybe help get the ball rolling for some people. Thank you.